Good morning, everybody. Nikki Burnett here, Taste Life Nutrition. Today's Taste Life Nutrition Radio. We're streaming live on KUHSdenver.com. And today's going to be super fun. It's fun for me when I am able to come in and chat a little bit with you about the things that I get excited about. And so my intent, going into this was to just kind of be super general about genetics and epigenetics and nutrigenomics and that kind of thing. And then what I started to realize was that I was really moving into genetics or epigenetics and heart health. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. One second. This one. Up. Like that way, other way. Okay, how's that? Okay. Got to get everything right here. Okay. So we're going to have a little bit of fun talking about epigenetics, talking about heart health, how we can bring the two together to really start to understand who we are, what our heart needs, what our cardiovascular system needs, how we can bring it all together, and how we can maybe mitigate some of the things that our family members, our ancestors have struggled with in the past when it comes to cardiovascular health and strokes and so forth. So let's do this. First, though, I need to, let's see, get some of my notes going here. Anyway, so first things though, we always start the show with gratitude, because gratitude can change the world. I truly believe that, and I think it's important to keep that in mind as we move throughout our day, is to remember the things that are so special for us, that give us strength and give us love. And if we practice gratitude, if we think about the one thing that we're grateful for that day and in that moment, I do believe it can change the world. It spreads, right? It's really beautiful. So today, I am super grateful for spring. It's really simple today. We're coming up on spring. I have been putting my seeds, not in the ground, but putting my seeds in, we've got the little gardens with the light so we can get seeds to start to sprout. And then I've got some pots and some things that are starting to sprout seeds. And this is just the time of new life. Things are starting to become green and the flowers are coming out. This really is my favorite time of year. So I'm super grateful to wake up, even though it's still a little bit cold, but to wake up and to just get to see, even with the little snow on the ground, the trees that are blooming and everything that's turning green. It really is such a beautiful, beautiful time. So that's what I'm grateful for today. So I want to give, first off, for anybody who may be joining and has not heard the term epigenetics, let's give a little bit of background on what epigenetics is and why it's such a beautiful concept. It's a beautiful science, because it's what gives us this amazing amount of power. So epigenetics, so we have our genes. Everybody knows what our genes are, right? They're who we are. They're what we look like. They're everything about us. That's who we are. So our epigenome are locations that sit on top of genes that have the ability to turn on and off. And they turn on and off. This is what makes it so amazing. Well, so let me back up, sorry. They turn on and off, but they are what regulate gene expression. So our genes express, but they have a regulator, which is our epigenome. They're called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, or variants, or some people might call them mutations. I think mutations is really incorrect, because we all have them. We all have, I don't know if it's millions of SNPs that are regulating every function, every genetic expression in our body. And so genetic expression can be that is our to a degree, our weight, but genetic expression can also be cardiovascular disease, which obviously is what we're going to talk about today. It can be diabetes. It can be autoimmune conditions. It can be, do you detoxify like the person next to you detoxifies? Do you have certain genetic pathways that detox pathways that function differently because you don't utilize nutrients the way this other person does, right? So it's the nutrients in our food, it's the vitamins and the minerals that push pathways to create metabolic function. And so sometimes if we have a specific genetic variant or SNP that functions differently, then it doesn't push these pathways properly, right? So then we have to, when we know that and we know what it is that pushes these pathways, then we have the ability to say, okay, well, then I probably need to supplement with this because my body's not working with me on this thing, and so I need to supplement so I can get this moving and pushing down the pathway properly. So what guides our epigenome, which is where the power comes in, is our lifestyle and pretty much everything in it, right? And so much of this stuff is the stuff that we have control over. So our lifestyle includes food, obviously. So it includes food, it includes stress, it includes trauma, it includes mindset, it includes sleep, it includes exercise, right? So it can be too much exercise, it can be too little exercise. Everything, so many of these things that we have control of are what control our epigenome, which is what controls genetic expression. So, other things to consider, but because I think it's really, really important, are things like what we put on our body. So body care products, those can be toxic. They can be estrogen mimickers. So this can be impactful for both men and for women if our own estrogen is not working properly, because we have all of these other chemical estrogens that are blocking the pathways, right? Blocking the receptor sites. So the things that we put in our own environment. So what are we cleaning our homes with? What are we cleaning our clothes with? What are we cleaning our sheets with? So if you're using a product, and this is a very generalized statement, but I believe it to be almost entirely true, if you're using a product where you continue to smell the scent of that product, so I'm thinking specifically laundry detergent, if you continue to smell that for more than a few hours, which some of them are for days, even after another washing, I've experienced this, these things are incredibly, incredibly toxic. And what are they doing? Besides, gunking up metabolic pathways, these are estrogen mimickers that are then throwing off our endocrine system and creating a situation of significant hormonal imbalance. And then so you think about all of these other estrogen mimickers, pesticides and herbicides and plastics and all of these things that are just constantly bombarding us every day. But when we get back to it, we have the ability to control so much of these things. We control, losing my battery. Anyway, we control what we put in our body, on our body, what we clean our homes with, what we put in our yards. Think about, we're seeing these commercials now with glyphosate and or Roundup. It's the same thing. Glyphosate is the chemical of Roundup that is the herbicide that kills weeds, right? So it's in our food. It's ubiquitous at this point. We had a show last week where we were talking about this. I eat organic. I take very good care of myself for the most part, but there are people who do better than I do. They do testing for glyphosate and their glyphosate levels are still high. My glyphosate levels are high because it's so ubiquitous. It's terrible. We may not put this stuff in our yard, but what about your neighbors, right? So it really is about helping to educate and hopefully trying to educate more and more on these things that are so detrimental to our health and impact our epigenome, which impacts our genetic, which creates genetic expression, right? So when we talk about conditions, chronic conditions, autoimmune disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease, all of the diabetes, all of these things we have a huge amount of control over. These are lifestyle. There are probably, what is it? I think it's 3 to 5% of the conditions that we might deal with are true genetic conditions. Most of them are lifestyle. And we can mitigate so much of this just by not using plastic, right? This is, yes, sure, it's a big thing with the environment too, but it's huge with our body. And not using these really toxic body care products, right? The things that are on the shelves of the regular grocery stores and big box stores. These things are terrible, and they're really, really creating a problem for us. So, getting down to it, we can do genetic testing. We can look at these variants and see who we are as individuals and how we process nutrients, how our metabolic pathways work, how these enzymes work that are catalysts in these metabolic pathways that push these pathways to do their job, right? And so that's where these variants come in, is with these variants can create, some enzymatic dysfunction, or it just doesn't, you're just who you are, right? I don't want to say it that way because it's not dysfunction. Our body is amazingly brilliant. And so, but the fact that we now know that we don't want a methylated form of B12, we would prefer, our body needs an adenosyl form or a hydroxyl form. I know that's getting a little bit deep into the woods, but we can look at this stuff. And we can look at this stuff and say, okay, this is actually what I need that is going to help me to optimize my life for the rest of my life, for the rest of my children's life, and then my life today, because of this, will impact hundreds of years ahead. Like the physical health of hundreds of years ahead, which is why if you listen to me, you hear me talk about soulful conception. Epigenetics is the key to all of this. It's really, the basis of everything that we are and everything that we can be. And the fact that my choices have the ability of impacting hundreds of years ahead of us is fascinating. It's beautiful. It's terrifying, right? Because it holds me accountable for the choices that I'm making. But that's a great thing. I don't want anybody else to be held accountable for my choices or for my body, right? So this is all really what it gets down to, is the ability to make the choices for myself, and then to teach others to do the same thing. So I want to dig in a little bit to heart health. It's a fairly complicated study, I think, obviously, but there's so much to it that we can take, and we can sit back and do testing to understand. And so I think there's a test that I do called the cardiac test, and I do that in conjunction with doing a lipid panel that is a much more comprehensive lipid panel than what you typically see at your doctor's office. I don't know why, it's just the way that it is. And so we've talked about this a little bit, and so you can go back and look at and find some of the videos around cholesterol specifically, we talk a lot about. But what we want to understand in a nutshell is when we're looking at a lipid panel that's a typical lipid panel, we're looking at HDL, LDL, maybe VLDL, we're looking at triglycerides, and we're looking at total cholesterol. And it gives us a little bit of information, but it doesn't give us enough information. And so what we're told in mainstream, whether it's media, whether it's medicine, whatever it is, what we're told is cholesterol, we have to watch our cholesterol, and that HDL is good cholesterol and LDL is bad cholesterol. And this is a really, it's a really simplified and it's just not the best way to look at cholesterol, just flat out. It doesn't make any sense, because we have to have cholesterol. We have to have both HDL and LDL. They both play a role in our body. LDL brings cholesterol to the tissue. We have to have cholesterol for cellular integrity and cellular function and brain function and hormone production. This is key to such a huge part of who we are. And if we're not allowing our body to produce LDL, what's happening then downstream? And that's the stuff we got to look at. You know, what's happening downstream from there, because it's super impactful to everything. So if we were to look at this, again, a little bit into the weeds, but I can't help it. If we were to look at the pathways of how hormones are produced, I probably should have had a slideshow set up for this, but if we look at the pathway of how hormones are produced, you know, again, we talk about these metabolic pathways where enzymes push these pathways down the line based on the nutrients that we consume. So at the top of this pathway, there is what's called pregnenolone, which is our master hormone, right? So we have all of these hormones that come off of pregnenolone. But what's above pregnenolone is cholesterol. So all of these downstream hormones that are so important to human health are blocked if we're blocking cholesterol. So we have to have LDL going to bringing cholesterol to the tissues. We also have to have HDL that takes cholesterol away from the tissue in order to be recycled, eliminated, whatever needs to happen to that cholesterol. Now, when we're looking at triglycerides, triglycerides are directly related to diet. So if your triglycerides are high, you're probably eating a really crappy diet, right? It's just, that's just the way that it is. So it's a little more cut and dry than maybe HDL and LDL. So, but then getting back to HDL and LDL, what we need to look into, and part of the panel, when I'm doing a lipid panel on someone, what I'm going to look at is I'm going to go deep into HDL particle sizes. So there are different classifications of HDL, and there are different subclassifications of LDL. So I want to understand inflammatory markers, right? I want to understand if the body is inflamed, because that inflammation is then going to impact the particle sizes of HDL and LDL. So if there's no inflammation and your LDL is high, that means and we can look at oxidized LDL, right, and small dense LDL. So these are the particle sizes. They oxidize if inflammation is high, which means they get small and dense, right? So they get oxidized and they get small and dense. What we want is big, buoyant, I always see them as, these fluffy particles floating around, doing their job around, around the body. And so if we're inflamed, then it's likely that our particle sizes are small and dense. But we can look at inflammation, we can look at the particle sizes, and that is indicative of what our true cardiovascular health profile looks like. And so same with HDL. If we're inflamed, HDL can also be problematic. So, and side note, something that we're not told is when HDL goes high, HDL plays a huge role in the immune system. So if HDL is too low, there's likely immune involvement. If HDL is too high, there's likely immune involvement. And so when we see an HDL number that's over maybe 80, I start to think, is there an autoimmune situation going on? Is there an immune situation going on? What's going on with the immune system that it's pushing that HDL high? And what we're told often is that we just want HDL as high as it can possibly be. So these are things that we need to really keep in mind. The body's so beautiful, it's so dynamic, it's so smart. And when we have these little red flags, and then we also, on top of that, then have our genetic, at least to a degree, a lot of our, genetic potentials, then we can really start to dig in and truly optimize our health, especially our cardiovascular health. So one of the things that we can look at, so there is, what I find a lot is a marker called homocysteine. Sorry, I'm grabbing my notes here. Okay. There's a marker called homocysteine, and it is an inflammatory marker, but what we usually see is homocysteine. So a couple of things. If I ask a doctor to do it, sometimes they'll do it and sometimes they won't. The attitude that I've gotten is, this person is too young, we don't need to check their homocysteine. I see homocysteine elevated in probably 75% of my clients. Young, old, doesn't matter. Younger, I don't, not necessarily with children, but say 18 and up, right? So elevated homocysteine is almost always directly related to one of two things. The inability to push the pathway properly, right? So this goes back to your epigenetic makeup. If your homocysteine is elevated, you might not be utilizing B12, folate, might not have enough magnesium, might not have enough betaine, trimethyl. I just lost my word. Anyway, doesn't matter. But there are supplements that we can take to address a lot of these factors that are pushing homocysteine too high. And so what's happening is homocysteine should move down the pathway, and so if it's not moving down, then it just elevates and elevates and elevates. Homocysteine is seen as a cognitive risk factor, but it's seen as a cardiovascular risk factor, but it also is a cognitive risk factor. So we'll look at labs and we'll see that the regular range, like your typical lab range of homocysteine, I believe is up to like 15 or something like that. What the data shows is anything over 11 is 100% chance of cognitive decline. So where I want to see you is I want to see you at 7, maybe 6. I don't want to see you lower than that either, because that's also a problem. But the other thing that can be happening here is oxidative stress. If you don't have enough antioxidant activity going on in the body, if you're not eating your fruits and vegetables, if you don't have antioxidants to squash the oxidative stress, then that also can push up homocysteine levels. So these are things that we want to consider, but we also, going back and looking at your if anybody who follows this, if you've heard the term MTHFR. So MTHFR is an acronym for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. And so that is folate. And so if you have an MTHFR SNP, what I want you to understand, and maybe many of you do by now, so MTHFR is sort of the SNP that brought epigenetics to the forefront. So Ben Lynch, love him, but he started to research, and he was researching the MTHFR SNP. And so as this SNP started getting out into the world, people started thinking, or freaking out, I've got the MTHFR, I've got the MTHFR. And so it's just one of millions of SNPs. I mean, I have MTHFR to a degree, but so does hundreds of millions of other people, right? We can have it to different degrees. Also, what we've got to take into consideration is this is only our potential. Our epigenome is our potential. It's not who we are, it's who we can be if we allow it. But we have to take symptoms into consideration always when we're looking at our epigenome. So if I'm testing, if I'm looking at somebody's epigenome and I'm testing, doing these other labs at the same time, and then I'm looking at their symptoms and I'm looking at their intake, you put all of these things together so we can have a really beautiful understanding of who this person is, who I'm working with, because we want to have everything in place. If someone has the potential for an autoimmune condition, but they're not presenting with an autoimmune condition, I'm not going to I'm not going to create a protocol around them for an autoimmune condition. I have potential for celiac. I have potential for other autoimmune conditions, right? So we can look at our epigenome and we can see autoimmune conditions in general, and we can see celiac specifically. We can also see gluten sensitivity. And so for me personally, I have the potential, and I also know that it runs in my family. I've seen it in my family. So does cardiovascular disease. So does diabetes. But I don't have any of the symptoms. I run my labs. I look at everything. And so I don't follow a strict autoimmune protocol because I don't have an autoimmune condition, at least as far as I know. Not yet. So, but also knowing my genetics helps me to mitigate that, right? So I eat well. I avoid gluten. I mostly avoid dairy. I eat very little sugar. I try to keep my inflammation in check. So by doing my labs, I'm looking at any inflammatory markers, right? So there are other things besides food that can increase inflammation. It can be our environment. Again, going back to all of these things that we're surrounded by that impact us, including, you know, outdoors environment, indoors environment, and so forth. These can create an inflammatory response. So we want to know this. There are lots of things that can push your epigenome into creating, you know, gene expression of a lot of these conditions. So we want to, so knowing this allows us to kind of have a direction. And that really is what it is. We want to be able to have a direction on where to go and what to do. So if I have MTHFR, do I need the methylated form of folate? Maybe, could be. So another thing, some people can be more prone to anxiety. So there are multiple forms of B12. And what we find, take this, I'm going to back up. Folate, not folic acid. Okay, so folic acid for some people, especially with specific genetic variants or epigenetic variants, can create, if they're already prone to anxiety, folic acid can push anxiety. So we want to stay away from folic acid because it's synthetic. It doesn't allow the natural folate to do its job. So we want to be really careful with the supplements that we take in. You got to know what you're taking. So anybody who is looking to get pregnant, who is pregnant, you got to look at your multivitamin, your prenatal, and make sure that it says folate. This is so, so important. If it says folic acid, throw it away, especially if you're trying to get pregnant or already are pregnant. I'm going to say it one more time. If your prenatal vitamin has folic acid in it, throw it away. If you are prone to anxiety and you're taking a supplement with folic acid in it, you might want to take a break from it and see if it's pushing your anxiety. These are really important to take to heart because, I mean, you know, we don't often know what's pushing you know, our symptoms, and then we just go get on drugs when we don't really need them. It has to do with our lifestyle very, very often, right? So B12, we see B12 all the time. Well, I mean, B12 is very important, right? So what we see typically is cyanocobalamin. Cobalamin is B12, and then you have the different forms. Cyanocobalamin is synthetic, it's cheap, and it's damaging. So B12 is, you know, and we can have genetic variants that don't allow us to utilize B12 properly. So, which then, you know, the metabolic pathways don't work properly. So this also can impact homocysteine. It can impact methylation. It can impact all of these different things that are so important. So cyanocobalamin, though, we think of cobalamin or B12 as what gives us energy, and it does. But what the cyanocobalamin does is it goes into the electron transport chain, which is where we create ATP in our mitochondria, and it shuts it down. So you're taking cyanocobalamin and actually is doing opposite of what it's supposed to do. So then you have the methylated form, which is the methylcobalamin. Some people don't do well with that either, right? So we've got to understand our epigenome, understand our symptoms, understand our labs, and understand what it is that our body needs. Do we need a different form in order for our body to work the way that it's supposed to work? This is why looking at these labs gives us so much information, because it allows us to optimize and to be really specific, which is the most fun, is just being super specific. I mean, I will say every day, you know, I'm different than everybody else in the world. You're different than everybody else in the world. And so to treat you as you are the same as everybody else makes no sense, right? I can't treat you like you've had the same trauma as your neighbor, right? Trauma plays a huge role in expression of genetics. So those are all things that I have to keep in mind as I'm working with my clients. What is their history like? What are their relationships like? All of these things impact our epigenome. So let's see, moving on into the importance of the epigenetics in heart health. So I was talking about this, I was talking about the cardiacs panel, which helps us to, it gives us an idea of how our body utilizes fat, utilizes saturated fat, what epigenetic markers can push inflammation, what epigenetic markers can push, what am I trying to think of? Blood pressure, right? Can promote high blood pressure or promote low blood pressure. So these are all things, especially when it comes to understanding how we should eat, is a big one. I've talked about this before. For me specifically, was I will say, and I will continue to say, saturated fat for the most part is not bad, unless you are a person who doesn't do well with saturated fat. That's a big deal. So genetically, some of us do better with higher fat, some of us do better with lower fat, some of us do better with higher protein and lower protein. I know for me specifically, I do better, doesn't mean I like it because I love fat, but I do better with lower fat. Doesn't mean low fat, but I do better with lower fat. I do better with moderate protein, and I do better with higher carb. Higher carb doesn't mean I'm going out and eating a bunch of bread and pasta. High carb means I'm eating a lot of vegetables. I eat sweet potatoes. I eat more fruit. All of these things that are good, healthy carbohydrates that I tend to do better with. And so we can see that, and it's so amazing to know how to cook for myself daily to optimize my body and my body's needs. I also know about my husband. He is a high protein, high fat, lower carb guy. And when this is one of the things that's really fun too, is when I'm working with people and sort of guessing their genetic makeup to a degree, right? Because you can kind of start to see people innately know who they are and what they need. And so for me, I've been vegan, I've been vegetarian. I don't think that's a smart way to go for most people. I do see it as being therapeutic if done properly, but therapeutic is not a lifestyle. Now, I was doing a detox with my husband. It was a 3-week detox, and a week of that was a week of no meat. So it was totally vegan. He was about to come off the rails. It's hilarious now, not so hilarious then. I won't ever make him do that again. But he is a meat eater, and you see it in him through and through, and you see it in his genetics. It's fascinating stuff. So sometimes what can happen too, and this is a little bit of a side note, but I think it's important for those who live in families where you eat different foods. And this can happen a lot when, I say this because I have clients who will come to me and their spouse or their kids are not willing to eat what they're eating. So it can sometimes create a little bit of an issue in the family where someone is not feeling supported, or it feels like there's got to be more work to be done. Sometimes, maybe, but I'll tell you what I do in my family, where my husband is going to eat more saturated fat. He's going to eat, I'm going to feed him more pork. I'm going to feed him more beef that's going to be higher in saturated fat. Where I will eat that some, but typically what I'm going to eat is I'm going to eat the chicken breast. Now, I say this, dark chicken is my favorite, dark meat chicken I love, but now that I know my genetics, I eat less of it. So while I'm cooking my chicken breast, I might cook him a steak, right? So I'm doing everything at the same time, and everything else, the other vegetables and things are the same. So sometimes we just have to start tweaking the way that we do things in the house because everybody has their different needs. It is a habit to get used to, and it's not always the easiest thing, but it can be done. So another thing I want to make sure when we're hitting on when it comes to fat, there are, gosh, there's so many things to talk about here. So we have omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. We've hit on this before. So omega-3s are precursors to anti-inflammatory. Eicosanoids are anti-inflammatory part of our immune system, whereas omega-6s are precursors to the pro-inflammatory part of the immune system. Both very important, right? It's kind of like LDL and HDL cholesterol. We've got to have both. We've got to have omega-6 and we've got to have omega-3. And to kind of just give a little bit of a deeper understanding of that is if I cut myself, what we're going to find is that the wound it bleeds and it gets red and it hurts and it's inflamed and it's angry, right? This is the pro-inflammatory part of the immune system coming in to help to heal that wound. But it can't stay that way, right? We have to have the omega-3 part of the immune system come in to squash that fire. So it's got to start that healing cascade, which is why we have to have both. There has to be a balance. So with that, what some of us don't genetically produce these, back up. DHA and EPA are not, they're essential fatty acids, so we don't produce them anyway. Didn't mean to confuse you there. So the body doesn't produce them, which means we have to get them in our diet. Now, with that being said, EPA and DHA in almost all cases come from fish, right? But they can also come from good, healthy grass-fed beef. So good, healthy meat also has a good, healthy profile of omega-3 fatty acids. So if you're eating, though, in an animal that's inflamed, it's a conventional CAFO, feedlot type of animal, those animals are inflamed, their saturated fat's going to be unhealthy, and they're going to be high in omega-6, which is what then we take in. We're told a lot of the times that we can get omega-3s from things like nuts and seeds and flax seeds and chia seeds and hemp seeds. This is incorrect. Well, it's partly incorrect. So it's actually a precursor to the EPA and DHA. So it's ALA, which is a precursor to EPA and DHA. So then the body has to convert ALA to EPA and DHA. Genetically, for some people, this is for everyone it's inefficient, right? It's a very inefficient process. But for some people, it just doesn't happen. So if we are not eating, if we're not taking in EPA and DHA specifically, but we're only taking in ALA, and we don't have the proper genetic makeup to convert ALA to EPA and DHA, we're not actually getting omega-3. I hope that makes sense. So we have to know, again, knowing our makeup helps us understand, okay, yeah, I can eat nuts and they're going to be good for me, but I also have to eat fish, or I at least have to take a supplement. Now, there are some algae. To me, they're expensive, and it makes more sense just to do fish oil. But there is some algae that is actually the EPA DHA. This is the plant-based form of EPA and DHA. It's the only plant-based form of EPA and DHA. All of them, other than that, are fish-based. So the plant-based form, that's your nuts and your chia seeds and your hemp and flax and that kind of thing, those are great. They have lots of great benefits to them, but I would not depend on them for your omega-3. Okay, so know your genetics, right? That's a big piece of it, is know your genetics, know what you need. There's another one that is, say, vitamin A. So you have and this goes back to if you're a vegan or if you're a vegetarian, this is important for you also, because these are things that you need to know about your body. So this helps us if we want to remain vegan or vegetarian. This then helps us to know where and how to supplement. So vitamin A is a fat-soluble nutrient. We have to have it, and we have to have fat with it in order for it to be absorbed. Other fat-soluble nutrients, we got A, D, E, K. CoQ10 is a fat-soluble antioxidant, so all of these super important in the body. Vitamin A specifically, we are told that we can get vitamin A from things like carrots, vegetables, fruit, that kind of thing. It is a plant-based form. It's beta-carotene. Beta-carotene has to be converted into retinol. So retinol is the animal-based form, the fat-soluble-based form of vitamin A. So the body must convert it. If you have specific genetics that don't allow for the conversion of beta-carotene to retinol, then you're not getting your vitamin A. And if you're not a meat eater, and you're not eating organ meats and things like that, then you're probably not getting vitamin A. And going back to it again, the conversion for those who do have the ability to convert it, the conversion is inefficient at best. So knowing, again, we can look at your micronutrient makeup, which is super fun. We got to look at your micronutrients to understand what you need as well. But, again, putting all of these things together just goes back to helping us understand you, what you need, who you are, how you can support your heart health, and how you can support detoxification pathways, how you can support your body, how you can support your family. I mean, these are things that are, they're fascinating and fun because I'm a nerd, but they give us so much information for our bodies. So there's a marker I want to talk about in the cardiac panel that I do, not the genetic panel. It's in both actually because it's a genetic marker. But this is one that in my mind, I believe is missed a lot, and I think it's really important. And if we knew this marker early on, it's hard to mitigate because of what it is, but there are studies showing that you can help this marker and to optimize. So this marker is called Lp(a). And I believe what happens a lot of times is this Lp(a) marker is problematic for people who have this gene and they don't know it. They have a massive heart attack because this marker was missed, right? So they have a massive heart attack. They have, it's those, sudden death kind of heart attack things. And so if we know this marker, again, Lp(a), I think I test this on everybody who will do a lipid panel with me, a deep lipid panel with me, and I do it pretty frequently because I think it's really, really important. Knowing this marker is so big. You got to know if this is a problem for you. Know this too. There are a lot of people who are fearful of knowing their potential, which is knowing your genetics, right? Your epigenome is your potential. This is power. Knowing your epigenome is power because then you know what to do, or you know how to find somebody who can help you know what to do. This is one of the most powerful things in my mind that we have and that we have control over. So when we know it, we can move forward and figure out answers on how to mitigate it. So if we just stay in the dark, then we're not making forward movement, and then we're not taking care of the risk factors. When we have that ability. There's another marker called ApoE. It's apolipoprotein E. And this can be a good marker for a number of reasons, but it also is a little bit of a scary marker. ApoE can help us understand a little bit more about the nutrients, the macronutrients that we should take in. So It can give us some indication as to how much fat we want or need, how much fat, how much protein, how much carbohydrate, right? And so there are 6 different subcategories of this ApoE variant. And so one of them, there's one that is a scary one, and it's ApoE44. And that is, if you have done any study on Alzheimer's disease, this is the Alzheimer's gene. It can impact also cardiovascular health. It can impact lots of things. And so it's one of those things that it's not good or bad, but knowing that you have it can give you the power to mitigate it. I'm going to say it a million times because I think it's so important. It gives you the power. So for me personally, I don't, as far as I know, have Alzheimer's in my family, but my ApoE is an ApoE44, which is, as far as Alzheimer's is concerned, the worst marker I can have. But what does that mean? That means I keep my magnesium where it needs to be. It means I keep my B vitamins where they're supposed to be. It means I keep my inflammation at bay. It means I really protect my brain, right? It means I do, you know, there are a whole list of things that we can do to help us to make sure that our body is in place where it's not going to start going down the road to Alzheimer's. Now, there's never a guarantee, right? Nothing's ever guaranteed in life, but we can damn sure work our tails off to do the things necessary to not put, so I don't put myself in that situation, so hopefully, so I don't have to put my family in that situation. So this is the stuff, man, time flies. I put my glasses on to see the clock. But this is the stuff of the future, and this is the stuff that helps us really and truly address people with personalized health, personalized nutrition, personalized medicine. We can look at pharmacogenomics and understand what drugs are going to be best for me for whatever the situation is, right? We're at the beginning of this stuff, but we can do it. I mean, I can test for this stuff. So knowing, you know, if you are in a situation where drugs are important for you, because drugs, without a doubt, impact our epigenome, and so we want to be super careful with the drugs that we take in, whether it's statins or, you know, if we're looking at cardiovascular health or any of the other drugs, cancer drugs, we can look and see, at least to a degree, what drugs are most beneficial for us, and what drugs are actually going to be worse for us that might be great for other people. So the ApoE44 and 34 genotypes, variants, sorry, those two don't do well with statins. And so people who are put on a statin who have one of these 2 variants could be more problematic, and they don't respond to it for the most part, right? So we want to, again, if I am not an advocate of statins in most cases, I will never say every case, but in most cases, I think we can address cardiovascular health, we can address all of these things with lifestyle if you're willing to do it. The negative effects of statins goes so deep when all we have to do is start to look at lifestyle. And then with that, we are tracking labs to make sure that the labs are going the right direction. And if we need to make changes, we do need to make changes, right? So this is not, I'm going to say this because I think it's important. This is not my data, but it comes from some of the data that I have read, that some believe, and this might be the case, that if you have already had a cardiac event, then statins may be a good thing for you. So I'm going to throw it out there, and that may be the case, may not be the case. It's outside of what I do. But, you know, there are times when drugs are necessary. But so often we can look at our lifestyle and we can make changes that then allows the body to work properly so we don't have to take the drugs. And maybe we have to take the drugs for a short period of time while we're making the lifestyle changes. That's fine as well. But knowing that drugs impact genetic expression is a big deal. So there's so many things that we don't know about drugs years down the road, right? So something happens years down the road. we don't know that we should be pinning it on the drugs that we took earlier in life. I mean, think of the amount of antibiotics that we take, right? We take lots and lots of antibiotics all the time. Those play a role in genetic expression. What happens 30 years down the road? Do we know that it's because of the years of antibiotics that we took because we had ear infections when we were kids? Don't know. But it's important for us to know that the possibility is there. So when we have our kids, we do our best to make the lifestyle choices so maybe the ear infections don't happen as often, so we don't have the amount of antibiotic use that disrupts our microbiome and creates problems way on down the road with whatever, including cardiovascular health, right? So I think that the power that we have is it's unlimited in so many ways. Okay, let's see, let's look at this. Is there anything on here that I want to talk to you about? So many of these things that, yeah, I'm afraid I can't get too deep into any of these because we're starting to move into, here's a good one. We're starting to move into running out of time. But we, so many of us hear about the role of nitric oxide and the importance of nitric oxide, and it is very, very important. I take regularly a nitric oxide supplement or something that will help my body to promote nitric oxide. But there are genetics or epigenetic variants. There's one called NOS3 that can affect the production of nitric oxide. So, which is, it's important for blood vessel health and for blood pressure regulation. So, the things that we want to think about then is, do we want to supplement so we can help our body to produce nitric oxide? Do we want to eat foods that are going to help us to produce nitric oxide? So we all hear about super beets, right? Now, I don't know much about super beets and the data behind it, but I do know that beets help to produce nitric oxide. Beets are amazing. I had a bunch of roasted beets last night. Some of my favorite things. So those, they're again, sorry to be repetitive, but having the information, knowing that you have this variant, helps you know what you can do to best address that variant. It's fascinating stuff. Let's see, so there is, okay, so ApoB. ApoB can impact LDL levels. So going back to, we can have familial high LDL. Doesn't mean it's bad. I don't know. We got to look deeper and understand, are you inflamed? Do you have oxidized LDL? Do you have small dense LDL? If it's a yes, then yeah, it's a problem. If it's a no, I'm not worried about elevated cholesterol or elevated LDL if everything looks fine. Right? So we got to put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. We've got to look at a complete picture, at least as complete as we possibly can. There are lots of things that we don't know. I'm learning things all the time. There's lots of things the medical community doesn't know. But being open-minded enough to learn, to be curious, to look at labs, to put data together, to take control of your own health, this is the stuff that matters. Let's see. What else? I think that's it. I think that's about all I have the time for right now. So probably what's going to happen, because I really dig this stuff and I didn't get quite as deep into some of it as I wanted to, because I ramble a little bit. We'll probably do this again. Well, whether it's cardiovascular or detox genetics or something else, digging into your body's ability to detox is another fascinating area, because we might be doing all the right things, but if our body's not utilizing the nutrients the way that it should, then we're not detoxifying properly. So what happens? I don't know, our estrogen goes high. We hold on to toxins in our body. We don't allow for mycotoxins or mycotoxin exposure tends to impact us to more of a degree than it would somebody else. That's genetic. You can have two people in a home that, man, totally off topic, but whatever. Two people in a home who is full of mold, one reacts, the other doesn't. it's toxic either way. But the fact is that there are genetics that impact that detox effect of mycotoxins. So there's so many things to talk about when it comes to this stuff, and I think it's a great it's a great and powerful. Oh, sorry, I'm seeing what's happening behind me. It's a great and powerful way to really take control of your health, take control of your heart health, take control of your cognitive health. You know, your cardiovascular system is also brain health and function and everything else. So this is the stuff that gives you the power, right? It's all right here in our hands, and it's really fascinating stuff. So we'll continue to talk about this. I want to put in another quick plug for for Soulful Conception, which is preparing for pregnancy, right? It's taking that time to make sure your epigenome is expressing well, and that your eggs are healthy, and that your sperm is healthy. So when it's time to conceive, you're conceiving to the very best health you can, which impacts pregnancy, it impacts delivery, it impacts that child, and it impacts hundreds of generations ahead of us. It's so beautiful. So you can go to tastelifenutrition.com, find me anywhere. All of the social media is Taste Life Nutrition. I put together, and I have it back behind me, I put together just a little, somewhat generalized list of supplements that I believe are some of the best cardiovascular supplements that we can take. They do not take genetics or epigenetics into consideration here, because everybody's different, but they are more general. They include phytonutrients, they include, you know, good healthy fish oils, these things that are so important to cognitive health, to cardiovascular health, to overall health. I decided to just put that together, and if it's something that you think would be important for you, most of these things I take, then jump on board and do it, because it's all good stuff. So you can go to the link, you can click on the QR code, whatever is easy for you. Obviously, if you have questions, comments, feel free to post anywhere, reach out to me, go to the website. I have a free assessment. If you want to fill out that assessment, I can reach out to you, we'll chat a little bit. If I can be of benefit, then we'll talk about it. If there is somebody else I know who will be a better benefit to you, then we'll talk about that too. So I always want to be here to be a resource and to have some fun. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. We will be here again live next week, 10 a.m. Mountain Time, streaming live on KUHSdenver.com, where we are global. So you can find us all the places where you find your favorite podcast. And then, of course, on all the places you see us now, streaming live. So, all right, have a wonderful week, a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.